Hi, I'm PJ Glenn from the Kenyon College Economics Department. I'm going to give you a quick tutorial on how to graph data in Excel. There's a lot to think about when you're deciding how to present your data graphically, but in this video I'm just going to cover the basics. But a good place to start is to ask yourself, what do I want the reader to take away from this picture? And hopefully answering that question will lead you to the right way to present your data graphically. For the first example, I'm going to illustrate to you how you make a scatter plot, which is a great way for visualizing a relationship between two variables at a point in time. So with that, let's take a look at the data that I have here. This is an abbreviated table from my research on temporary price reductions, also known as sales. And I'll tell you very quickly what you're looking at here. Each row is a product category. Column B gives annual revenue for that product category in millions for my data sample, which is a bunch of stores covering 50 different markets in the United States. Column C is the fraction of weeks that items from this particular category are on sale. That is at a special price. And those are the only two variables that we're going to use, so I'll stop there. One question I'm interested in is why stores have sales. And one hypothesis is that stores have sales in order to bring customers into the store who are sensitive to sale prices. So one way to test that hypothesis is to look at the relationship between category revenue and fraction of items on sale. The idea is that a store, if they're having a sale to bring people into the store to begin with, should choose to have sales on items that are popular, that people buy often. So one way we can look at the data to see if it's consistent with that hypothesis is to create a scatter plot of annual revenue for the category and fraction of weeks on sale. So that's what I'm going to do. The first thing you do is highlight the two columns of data that you want to graph. It's very simple. Then you tell Excel, I want a scatter plot. By the way, I selected charts right here. You select scatter plot, and Excel creates the chart for you, immediately guessing on a bunch of options that you can change after the fact. Let me point out quickly that the leftmost column is the column that Excel is going to use for the horizontal axis. If you want to change that, the easiest way, I think, is just to make sure the column in your table that's to the left is the one you want on the x-axis. You can go in and change that directly, but it's a bit more complicated. Okay, let's suppose you want to change the axes. That's a common adjustment, I find. So the way you can do that is to right-click on the horizontal axis in this case. Select Format Axis. And in this case, I'd like the x-axis to be a logarithmic scale. You can choose the base and for your log scale. From my purposes, it doesn't matter much. And the change happens immediately, you can see. Let me uncheck it and then check it again. Other things you can do is to change the minimum value and the maximum value and then the tick units. You can also change the formatting of the numbers on the axis, the text font, etc. Okay, the last thing I want to do in this scatter plot, because I think it's more useful just to label the axes as opposed to have a legend right here, having a legend right here, so I'll delete that and then go up to Chart Layout and select Axes Titles. Start with the horizontal axis. I'll select the option to have the title below the axis, and I'm going to call this, you can just start typing immediately. I'm going to call this thing Log Annual Revenue. And then I want to do the same thing for the vertical axis. Here you have a couple of options. You can orient the text in a rotated way so that you kind of have to tilt your head to read it, or you can have the letters appear vertically. I find that this is rotating the title is the best option. and this is fraction of weeks on sale. Okay, so that's a pretty good chart right there. You can adjust the title, of course. You can adjust how these markers look. Let's go ahead and do that, and I'll show you the other way of formatting elements of the graph. That is to go up here to this current selection thing. Okay, if you click that, you can format the chart area, the title, etc. Well, I want to format my data series. Click Format Selection, and let's suppose instead of those diamonds, what I want is, oh, I don't know, X's. There's a bunch of different shapes to choose from. And you can change the size. Okay, I think the size is too big. The nice thing is Excel makes the changes immediately, and you can check as you make adjustments to see if that's what you want. Okay, there's the scatter plot. A second question I'm interested in is actually what determines the characteristics of sales, how frequent they are, how deep their discounts are, and how people respond to them over time. Okay, so to do this, what we're going to want to do is like a time series chart. So I have an example of some time series data here. What I've got is a couple of price indexes. One is the regular price index, the price that you pay over time and how it changes over time if you buy at the regular price. The other is the unit price index. That's the price people pay on average, including sales. So these two, any difference that shows up between these two will be due to changes in the characteristics of sales. So if I want to see how that changes over time, what I can do, again, it's very easy. I highlight my data, and this time I'm going to include what's going to go on the x-axis. Those are the dates. Okay, I have each data point for each quarter since 2001 up through 2011. And then again, I'm going to go to charts, and this time I'm going to do a line chart. Sorry you can't see that, but I'll choose this line right here. And boom, Excel tells me, or automatically generates a chart of these two time series. And I just want to point out that it automatically knows that the x-axis takes these labels, which in this case happen to be dates. Now, one thing I definitely want to change here is the scale, because I've got all this empty space down here, and both of these indices are set up to start at a value of 1. So what I'd like to do is get a bit closer look to see the variation in these two. So I'm going to right click. Actually, let me show you the other way of getting to this. If you go back to your charts ribbon here and click Format, over here in this section there's a drop down menu, and what you can do is you can click the let's see, we want to do vertical axis, and we want to format this guy, and that brings up the menu that we got last time with a right click. In general, there are multiple ways to do things in Excel, so play around. I think good advice is to point at something you want to do and right click and see what pops up, and if it doesn't work the first time, try it again. Okay, so I want the minimum of this guy to be something closer to 1, so I'll make it 0.9. And I want the maximum, I'll leave the maximum at, well, let's see. I can look at the chart here. It makes the change immediately. Let's make it 1.25 so I can really zoom in on the data. Okay, and what we see is that the two price indexes tracked closely together initially, and then they separate, and then they get a bit closer together, and then they separate. So there's some interesting phenomena going on here, which is again is part of my research. The last thing I'm going to show you is how that you can format these lines. Okay, so again, you could either right click on the line and click Format Data Series, or you could go up here and select the data series. But what I'm going to do, let's suppose I wanted that to be a dotted line instead of a solid line, so I can tell the difference if I print this chart in black and white. You click on line here, And then you go to weights and arrows. I know that's not terribly clear, but that's why we're showing you this video. And then you can choose what kind of dot you want. You can also choose the thickness of your line. Suppose I want it to be a really thin dotted line, I could choose that. You can change the color, all kinds of features. You can also add markers to mark specific data points if that's what you want. The nice thing is when you make these changes, they show up immediately. So for example, that looks a little thin to me. So I'll make it a little bit thicker. Okay. So there we go. And over here you have your legend, which automatically updates and shows me, okay, yes, this is my regular price index. This is my average price paid or unit price index. I encourage you to play around. There's lots you can do with Excel charts. The last thing I'll mention is that there are several other different kinds of charts you can do. I'll point out a couple here. One is you can do a 3D surface if you want to look at the relationship between three variables. It's a bit more challenging. Another way to look at three different variables is through bubble charts. That allows you to plot a variable on the x, on the horizontal axis, the x-axis, and the vertical axis. And then you can have a third variable associated with each data point that dictates the size of the bubble. Very useful chart. And then there's a whole bunch of others which I would encourage you to go ahead and play around with until you find the best way to communicate the data that you have to your readers. Thanks for watching.